Some masks are meant to be worn, others are meant to be left alone. When Olivia found an ancient mask in a market, she didn't realize it was looking for a new face. On vacation in Japan, Olivia wandered into a small antique shop tucked away in an alley. The owner warned her not to touch the wooden mask resting on the highest shelf, but the moment she saw it, she had to have it. The mask was strange, smooth and featureless except for two slits where the eyes should be. It felt oddly warm in her hands. That night, she dreamt of empty streets and faceless figures. She could hear them whispering. The next morning, her reflection looked wrong. Her features seemed softer, like they were blending together. Her eyes looked hollow. The mask sat on her dresser, waiting. By the second night, she could hear it breathing. The whispers from her dreams followed her into the waking world. The mask no longer sat where she left it. It was closer. And when she touched her face, her skin didn't feel like her own. Terrified, Olivia tried to throw the mask away. But no matter how far she ran, it always found its way back. On the third night, the whispers grew louder. The walls of her hotel room seemed to pulse, the shadows thickening in the corners. She refused to sleep, clutching the mask in trembling hands, determined to burn it come sunrise. But it didn't wait for sunrise. She woke up unable to move. Shadows pooled around her bed. The mask crawled toward her. Then it was on her face. She couldn't scream. Her skin tightened, her features melting away. In the mirror, her reflection shifted, becoming something else. Someone forgotten. And from the floor, the mask she had worn before was waiting for its next owner. Olivia was never seen again. Her hotel room remained untouched, her belongings left behind as if she had vanished into thin air. The antique shop in the alley remains open, its shelves filled with relics from forgotten times. Tourists browsing the shop sometimes feel an odd pull toward the highest shelf. Their hands reach out, guided by an unseen force. And behind the slits in the mask, something watches. Some artifacts are better left untouched. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and turn on notifications. But never put on a mask without knowing who wore it last. They say rivers carry the memories of the dead. When Daniel swam in the forbidden waters, something old remembered him. Daniel had always been drawn to the wilderness. On a solo hiking trip in South America, he ignored the locals' warnings about the nameless river, a body of water said to consume those who entered it. He thought it was just a legend. He was wrong. The river was beautiful, crystal clear, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The moment he stepped into the water, a deep chill spread through him. Something shifted beneath the surface. That night, he woke up gasping. His lungs burned as if he had been drowning. His skin was damp. And outside his tent, the river was whispering. The next day, Daniel found footprints in the mud near his campsite. Bare feet, too many of them. He checked his phone, flipping through the photos he had taken. His stomach clenched. In the reflection of the river, there were figures standing behind him. That night, he dreamed of them. Faces half submerged, eyes open, mouths moving silently. Pleading. Then he woke up. But his body was still lying in the tent. He was watching himself sleep. Paralyzed, Daniel's vision blurred as his reflection in the river twisted. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It was him, but waterlogged, decayed, reaching out. A voice gurgled through his mind. "You swam where the dead rest." His other self lunged, pulling him downward, into the water, into the darkness, into memory. Daniel struggled, thrashing against the current, but the water held him fast. Faces loomed all around him now, their eyes hollow and knowing. They had been waiting. He sank deeper. The riverbed stretched impossibly far below, filled with the remnants of those who had been here before him. Bones broken and worn smooth by time littered the depths, the voices of the drowned wrapped around him, whispering their stories, their regrets. Then silence. Daniel opened his eyes. He was standing on the shore, drenched and shivering, though he did not remember crawling out. His tent was gone. His belongings were gone. Only the river remained, flowing as it always had. But something was different. He turned to leave, but his shadow remained cast in the water. It watched him. His heart pounded. He stepped forward, and so did the reflection, only it wasn't perfectly synchronized anymore. It hesitated. Its lips parted. "Let me out!" Daniel ran. His pulse roared in his ears as the whispers followed him, growing louder with every step. By the time rescuers found his abandoned campsite days later, there was no sign of him. Only his phone remained, buried in the mud, still recording. The sound of rushing water filled the last few seconds. Then, faintly, a voice, gurgling, pleading, "Help." Rivers never forget. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and turn on notifications, but be careful where you swim. Some waters are not meant for the living. If you ever hear your name whispered in the wind when no one is around, never answer. Luca had always been told to respect the forests near his grandmother's village in Chile. The elders warned of El Susurrador, the whisperer, a spirit that lured people into the trees with their own name. He never believed in it, until the night it called for him. The sound came at dusk, a gentle voice just beyond the tree line. "Luca." It wasn't an echo. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, something waiting. He ignored it. But the next night, it called again, closer. Luca's grandmother grew anxious. "You must never follow," she warned. "It does not call you. It wears your name." But curiosity gnawed at him. He set up his phone to record near the trees, leaving it overnight. The next morning, he played the footage. Through the rustling leaves, a figure stood in the darkness, featureless, watching. Then, in perfect clarity, it spoke. "I see you now." That night, the whisper came from inside his house. Luca's breath caught. He turned slowly toward the open doorway. The hallway was dark, but he wasn't alone. A shape stood there, just out of reach of the light. Tall, thin, its face shifting, almost his own, but not quite. Then it smiled and whispered his name. Luca's heart pounded. He forced himself to step back, to look away, to remember his grandmother's warning. But the thing in the dark took a step forward. "I know you hear me." His phone vibrated in his hand. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Don't listen. Don't speak. Don't look." His breath hitched. His grandmother. It had to be. But the whispering didn't stop. The thing moved closer, its features shifting, molding into a twisted version of his own reflection. "Luca," it said again, voice softer, "you've already answered." The lights flickered. His fingers felt numb. He took a step back, but the room stretched, the shadows lengthened. The whisper wasn't coming from the figure anymore. It was everywhere. Then silence. The next morning, Luca was gone. His phone was found outside, still recording. The last thing it captured was the sound of footsteps and a whisper, "Who's next?" His grandmother never spoke of him again. But at night, when the wind shifts, the villagers swear they hear a voice, calling a name. Sometimes it's Luca's, sometimes it's their own. Some voices are not meant to be answered. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and turn on notifications. But if something calls your name in the dark, never reply. Some ruins are meant to be forgotten. But when Alex took a stone from the old shrine, the whispers began. Alex was a travel vlogger, always searching for undiscovered places. When he arrived in a remote village in Eastern Europe, the locals warned him about the ancient shrine in the forest, a place where the gods were buried. He should have listened. The shrine was little more than crumbling stones, overgrown with moss. But something about it felt wrong, as if the air was heavier, the silence too deep. Curious, Alex pocketed a small carved stone as a souvenir. That night, the whispering started. At first, it was faint, a voice just at the edge of hearing. Then it grew louder. "Return us!" The voice was not alone. It murmured in an ancient tongue, too many voices speaking at once. The stone grew warm in his pocket, vibrating like a heartbeat. His camera glitched. The footage from the shrine distorted, showing shadows that had not been there before. Then his reflection changed. He stood before the bathroom mirror, staring at his own face, but his mouth was moving, whispering words he did not understand. His lips curled into a smile that wasn't his. "Return us." Alex ran. He drove through the night, heart pounding, gripping the stone like a lifeline. But no matter which road he took, the village always appeared ahead. The whispers were inside his head now, a chant, ancient and angry. "We were never meant to be moved." The sky darkened unnaturally. Shadows stretched too far. Hands reached from the earth, grasping, pulling. His vision blurred, the world twisting. Then silence. The car sputtered to a stop on the outskirts of the village. His breath came in ragged gasps. He hurled the stone from the window, watching as it tumbled into the undergrowth. The whispering stopped. For a moment, nothing moved. The air was still, almost peaceful. Then the trees rustled. A figure stepped onto the road. Tall, cloaked in shifting darkness, its eyes glowing like embers. It raised a hand, palm open. A single word echoed in Alex's mind. "Too late." The road beneath him cracked, the asphalt splitting apart like dry earth. The village lights flickered. Something moved beneath his feet, a shadow stretching toward him. The stone was no longer in the forest. It was in his hand. Alex screamed, but the sound never left his throat. The shadows surged forward, swallowing him whole. Days later, travelers found Alex's abandoned car at the edge of the village. His camera was intact, the footage eerie and incomplete. He was never seen again, but the stone had been returned to the shrine. And the whispering had stopped. Some things should remain undisturbed. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. But remember, souvenirs should never be taken from sacred places.